Welcome to the 7th episode of Renegade Thinkers Live, a show that promises to be long on marketing insights and short on overhyped buzzwords. We'll be drinking in the latest tactics and the coolest gin. Yep, this may be the only live marketing show that also features a gin tasting. This show is being live streamed via our friends at Restream, and if you want to drink along at home, today we're tasting Solvay Gin from Far North Spirits. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, live from my home studio in New York City. And as I like to say on my podcast, hello, Renegade Thinkers. Several years ago, I had the good fortune to work on the Panasonic Toughbook, a product that my agency, Renegade, both named and launched. In the early days of that brand, long before ABM was named ABM, we worked with a client's relatively small budget and their sales team on a vertical marketing strategy, starting first with law enforcement and then moving on to the military. We figured there was no greater need for an industrial strength product like this. This literally is the first Toughbook that was ever made. And this, the challenge was, once we got it into the police and the military, would it survive? Would it hold up? Well, sure enough, we had one of these in a police car installed, and a bullet went through the screen and kept on working, which was sort of an amazing torture test. Sure enough, that target police, military grew dramatically. We added telecom and oil and gas. In about 5 years, through a vertical marketing strategy, we grew that business to over $500 million. It was a vertical marketing success story I'll never forget. So fast forward to 2021, and vertical marketing is as relevant as it ever was, which is why I'm so excited to introduce you to some amazing CMOs. First, please welcome Ian Howells, head of marketing for Sage Intacct, and the star of episode 119 of Renegade Thinkers Unite. And he's really turned vertical marketing into an art form, creating what he calls micro verticals. Hello, Ian.
Great to be here, Drew.
So where do you start when it's time to, when you decide, how do you even pick a vertical market?
Yeah, so one of the things I first started doing this at Documentum with Jeffrey Moore, who wrote about this and kind of invented it, really with Crossing the Chasm and Inside the Tornado. And we kind of learned a lot. We got kind of religion around vertical marketing then, and it's really evolved over the next couple of decades. And I think there's a big difference between a startup and a big company. And the analogy I like to have at a big company is when you're doing vertical marketing, it's Darwin versus TAM. And kind of when you explain what that really means is, a lot of people are tempted by the biggest target opportunity. They look at the biggest opportunity, they look at the market size, they look at the SIC code, and bigger is better. And it's kind of, my analogy is, it's like saying I want to be a basketball player because Michael Jordan's really rich. If you're 5'6", probably not a good idea. But people kind of do that. So it's kind of like death by SIC code. So the Darwin approach, particularly at a big company, is you're not short of customers like a startup. You have an abundance of great customers. And in reality, you probably market to them in a horizontal way. And there's certain places you're just naturally really successful, and your core product is really, really good. You just don't know it yet. And so what you really look for in your core horizontal are these patterns of customers doing a very similar thing that really socialize with each other. They may not even be connected by SIC code. For example, so they're like a secret society. And you're really looking for patterns, and you go to their websites to see how they describe themselves. And they may all use subtly different terms. And you really get your hands dirty. I've worked with some great big data AI guys, and they say you've got to get your hands dirty and really understand the data. And AI is starting to help. So the key thing is when you discover it, it's really a society of people that socialize what you do. They discuss you, maybe have their own associations, and then you break them down into these what we call verticals and micro verticals. So, for example, a way to say you know what you're talking about is to say I focus on manufacturing. And in reality, if somebody says that, what they're really saying is you really analyze what they're saying is planes, trains, cars, and pharmaceutical companies are all the same, which is insane. So what our approach is really saying, we focus on not-for-profits because we're naturally very good there, but then we go down to faith-based organizations and even Catholic dioceses, and you get more and more specialized, and your yield goes up dramatically. So our approach is really Darwin versus TAM, and we choose Darwin.
So this micro vertical, and I love the nonprofits getting to faith-based, even then getting into diocese, you really start to see, well, gee, faith-based, if you had to develop marketing against that, that's one thing, but that's a lot of ground. But if you get down to archdiocese level, so how do you make sure, though, when you're getting down to these micro verticals, that you really end up getting to understand them and aren't doing a lot of times what passes for vertical marketing is, oh, let's show a picture of what it is they're making. For targeting manufacturers of cars, let's show a car. See, we get it.
So you probably appreciate this more than anybody, but the secret sauce is being really good at interviewing customers. People don't do enough. Most people are horrible at interviewing customers. They either have very short interviews, or they open the conversation by saying, "Hello, stranger. What's your pain?" Which is not a great way to start a conversation with a stranger. So we really focused upon really being best in class at interviewing customers, and we really have 45-minute conversations that are kind of interesting and really with open-ended questions. And what we're really looking for is what Jeffrey Moore used to call a discontinuity. So has something fundamentally changed within your micro vertical so that everybody has the same pain, and we'll change and then really change it as a market rather than as an individual customer. And what's interesting is we work with partners, and once you find that is your message, and consistently saw people find the discontinuity and not use it in the message. It's like you found the gold. So once you find the gold, you want to really understand it. Now, if there is no discontinuity, what you're really doing is using the interview to see, why do these customers, what's the pattern of buying? And you really have to understand what Jeffrey Moore called the compelling reason to buy. How do I reduce the time you take? How do I reduce your cost? How do I reduce your risk? And how do I make you grow more quickly? And then really understand that and really articulate that as a customer story. One of the things we say over and over again is if you really understand your customers and somebody says, what does your product do? You describe it through a customer story. When they ask you, what does your company do? You describe it through a customer story. And that's the way you get people to understand what you do. So Moore always talked about, when you summarize, you may do 50 interviews. If you do it correctly, you can write a Jeffrey Moore 10-point plan in an afternoon, because you know your market, you know your target customer, you know your compelling reason to buy, you know your whole product or the partner products, your partners, the distribution, the pricing model, the competition, and the positioning. And once you know those top 10 things, you understand how to approach a market. And then you attack it and you dominate it. When we think about what we're really looking for is very similar people in very similar markets, have the same problems, it's perfect for ABM. So we do ABM at massive scale because we don't do it on one-to-one. We do it through the micro vertical approach, and you can really approach a market and dominate it very, very quickly, typically about 12 months. That's really our secret sauce.
I love that, and it reminds me of a couple of things. If anybody, for the folks that own smaller businesses or services business, I highly recommend you read David C. Baker's The Business of Expertise. He has a phrase called "drop and give me 20," and that 20, if you know a market so well that you can name 10 things to that customer that they may not even have known about their category. I remember at one point years ago, we were working with IBM, and they were targeting software developers. And we did a lot of homework. We created a sort of a developer Olympics for them. And one of the things that we allowed them to do was shoot down with a dart gun a copy of a photo of Jar Jar Binks. And you needed to know that this was the most hated character among a beloved group. And so that was the kind of insight that I think if you know your market well, you can find and have fun with. All right. So that's great. That sets the stage. Now, let's bring in Lynne Capozzi, from the CMO of Acquia. Lynne was the star of episode 260. And so welcome.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Drew.
Nice to see you. So let's talk about your vertical approach and how that applies to your business.
Sure. So we do, I love Ian's suggestions, by the way. So we also do interviewing. We probably don't do it to the extent and formalize it. So I'll take a few tips from Ian around that. But what we do is we really look at, where have we had success in particular industries, and make sure that we can find the right connection between, what our product does and is it solving a solution for that particular industry. So, we spend time kind of figuring out what those industries are, and started with, financial services. Well, what does that mean? Does it mean banking? Does it mean insurance? It means different things, right? So the one thing that I've learned over the years is that in order to attack the verticals, you really have to have a cohesive plan. So, I will never do a vertical without having a similar sales playbook to accompany it. So I have to have a collection of assets. I have to make sure we know what that message is that's right for that industry. I really have to make sure that our solution is right for that industry. Sometimes particular industries will have regulations, and maybe your product isn't good at those regulations. Don't spend time there. Spend time where your product is a good fit for the industry. So I make sure that, one, it's a great product fit. Two, I've got the right messaging. And I do that by making sure that we take advantage of all of our existing customers in that industry and figure out, what are our best kind of pain points, and what are we helping them with. And then I make sure I have a collection of assets that I develop, everything from a pitch deck to case studies to ebooks to landing pages. I surround that with a great digital campaign and a lot of ABM. And then I monitor it as it goes along. Because one of the things, for instance, that we saw this year is a vertical strategy that we had in the beginning of 2020 or in 2019 didn't work this year, because we had to turn up certain industries and turn the dial down on certain industries. So, in the past, in 2019, for instance, I was targeting travel and transportation. Well, it's probably the last place that you want to be in 2020. Hopefully we'll get there in 21. But so I think it's always looking at, I think of them as dials, right? What industries are we turning up? What industries are we turning down? And sometimes those industries are like, you're not totally expected. I'll give you one example. I mean, there are some industries now that we're totally dialing up on, right? Higher education, it makes sense. They've all gone online. It definitely, they need our solution. Government, retail, every retail establishment has gone online. So those are good examples of kind of ones that are turning up. Another one, which was kind of unexpected for us, is insurance. So apparently during the whole pandemic, the world has grown much more attentive to their future, if you will. And so insurance companies are going crazy. They're booming because so many people want to buy insurance now, and life insurance. So
that's so interesting. I hadn't heard that, but it makes sense. I guess it's sort of, if you have a gloom and doom mindset and you're seeing what's happening in the world, I guess you go, yeah, we better insure ourselves, because who the heck knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's, at some point, right? I think all of us had a little doom and gloom at some point this year. So that does make sense. So I think it's really important that you're monitoring it real time in terms of what's happening in your space,
So is there it's interesting about travel and transportation, although I did hear that a number of travel companies, those that were obviously had a lot of cash in the bank, or lucky enough to, did start to work on their infrastructure, because that was something that they could do while they were not having it. But I'm wondering if during 2020, there's a vertical that really heated up. So you mentioned insurance, but that you had a particular success with.
Food delivery services,
Right.
consumer products, CPG, that was huge. And retail. Retail is another big one, because whether or not resale establishments were open or not, they all had to go online. And they all had to make a switch. If they didn't have an infrastructure yet digitally, they needed it quickly. And the ones that did have it wanted to increase it.
Okay. All right. Well, Mika Yamamoto, CMO of F5, has been really patient there. Mika, welcome. And by the way, Mika was on episode 184 of Renegade Thinkers Unite. Anyway, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. So it's nice to see you. So you've been listening to all this conversation. How important is vertical in your marketing mix?
It's extremely important. I appreciate hearing, Ian's thoughts as well as Lynne's thoughts. Death by SIC code is certainly something that you can be subject to. And so focus. And I think Lynne had thematically the same element as well, in terms of, needing to focus. For us, it's important because, number one, because some of our offerings are more relevant to some verticals than in different ways in some verticals than others. So we were able to, for example, sell into the airline industry last year to be able to help remove some friction for customers and maximize of those customers that were flying. For some of our airline customers, remove some of the frictions on their customers' behalf, so they're able to capture as many customers as possible, because there are so few that were out there.
Yeah.
And that's different than looking at, for example, some of our banking customers who are looking for, securing transactions and driving. A lot of countries are now accelerating their digital transformation due to COVID. And realizing they may be behind. So the Japanese banking industry, for example, is really looking to accelerate their digital transformation in banking. And so that's a very different set of transactions in terms of open banking. And we use different words. We use different, there's different use cases that are relevant to that industry compared to, the federal government, federal governments worldwide. Is a unique opportunity for F5 in terms of securing access to federal information, and in those cases there was a lot of thematic conversation with Lynne and Ian about talking about ABM. Federal agencies don't really like companies to use targeted digital ads, because it makes it seem like some people don't realize that those digital ads aren't viewable by everybody. And so federal agencies are certainly agencies that usually most dealings that we have with federal agencies are, you require a certain security clearance, and they don't want you to be public or out there with talking about the types of solutions you may have for them. And so that's a very different approach. And so each one of those instances, whether it's financial services or federal governments or the hospitality industry, has different routes to market, has different use cases, and different ways that they use what we have to offer. And so going the vertical route certainly helps us be more relevant. And I think Ian and Lynne both talked about like finding out where that Venn diagram is on where you can uniquely serve versus saying, hey, we can be all things to all people. We can't serve every need of every vertical that we're in, but we be very specific about the needs that that you can focus on within a given vertical.
And I'm wondering, as I'm listening to you and all of you talk about this, I've a couple questions. Which comes first? Is it a customer sort of opens your eyes to a vertical, or you guys say, you know what, we need a new vertical. Let's see if we can figure it out and analyze. I mean, it's a chicken or an egg thing, but I'm curious, have any of you opened up a new vertical from scratch in the last 12 months?
We have. We have traditionally focused on federal government service providers, so telecom providers and financial services companies. But we realized actually we took a step back and looked at our data and said, okay, if we look at the growth of our business and we look at all the opportunities that are they coming from where we've traditionally played, or are they coming from other industries? And we actually realized by looking at that data, we were getting traction in markets outside of those areas, which was, hospitality and travel, as well as retail. So this provides us a different view in terms of opportunities for growth and opportunities to then be a lot more targeted and focused on a different area, which means that we, using different language, different use cases in order to target those markets, which was untapped potential for us because we weren't being as intentional as I think we are now in those new areas.
And a lot of times in vertical marketing, I have found they can tell if you're a pretender, right? And they can sort of sense that you really aren't in their milieu, so to speak. You're kind of a foreigner coming up. You're a Yankee coming down into the South, kind of a thing. And I'm curious if you have found in your experience with verticals, if in fact that there is this, let me know when you've worked with 10 police force. Like we found that we had to get a group and that's why not only we were doing vertical, but we did geographically vertical too. So we could get some density in an area and say, okay, these 3 police forces in this county are now using the Tough Book. I'm curious if that mirrors any of your experiences.
So part of the experience we've got when you think about people, you almost have a choice of do you hire somebody from the industry or somebody who's a marketing person that can learn new industries really quickly. And I remember something that stuck in my mind from I used to do derivatives contracts on Wall Street. that we hired somebody from Merrill Lynch. We took him into Lehman Brothers thinking it'd be great, and they just rejected him because they said he doesn't know what you know, and he doesn't know anything about Lehman Brothers, so he's useless. So really, what you want to have is a marketing person who's kind of has a lot of curiosity, because even if somebody's been doing healthcare for 20 years, they may not have done dental practices, or they may not have done elderly care. So from our perspective, we hire kind of intellectually curious people who have a background in a vertical but want to learn more, and then marketing people rather than people from the industry.
Interesting. That makes so much sense, because if you think you know it and you're not willing to ask the questions, you're not gonna get beyond the surface. That's really interesting. All right. Well, I would love to just plug for a moment CMO Huddles, and I'm just going to spend a second on it. This is something that we launched in 2020. It's an invitation-only subscription service that brings together an elite group of CMOs to share, care, and dare each other to greatness. One CMO described a huddle as a cross between an expert workshop and a therapy session. Ian, Lynne, Mika, does that sound about right?
I'd like to say how useful we found them. When we were doing a virtual user group, it was awesome just to listen to the experiences that other people were doing. And we used so much kind of just what we discussed amongst the group to actually make a really successful online user group, because we're all kind of doing it for the first time. So it was phenomenally useful.
There you go.
Yeah, I think there's such a great idea exchange, just because we come from the common element is marketing, but I think we can learn from different industries, speaking of verticals. And so many of us come from different industries. I'm in the tech industry, but there's many from other industries that we can learn from, who set a different bar and who do things differently, but we can take those best practices and apply them to where we are. And I think over the last year, it's been very helpful, just because a lot of the things that we're doing are relatively new, right? I mean, we're like, holy crap, we all have to go online to everything. And then, so we're all switching online, and now we're dealing with Zoom fatigue. We're dealing with so many different challenges that are, again, relatively new. And so figuring out how we're all reaching and discovering and trying things out has definitely been invaluable in terms of just sharing new ideas, seeing what works and maybe what doesn't, because some people may have tried things and seen around corners that we haven't done yet. And so we can learn from each other's exploration.
You know, Drew, the other thing that I think is it's been very helpful for me is that you have a level of flexibility with kind of how you run the huddles, because sometimes you come in and you say, here's the topic that we're going to talk about. But often you'll say, what's on people's minds? What are you struggling with this week? What is it that you want to know? And you see people immediately jump in to say, oh my gosh, this is something that I'm facing this week. Or how do I present this to the board? Or, whatever the topic is. And so I like the flexibility that you provide to help us with real-time issues.
You're reminding me that I forgot to ask that question today, and Huddle, I was so aged, but that's hilarious. Well, anyway, if you're listening and you're curious about CMO Huddles, visit cmohuddles.com. And one of the things that was so interesting about that as we move back to vertical is, you really have to dive in. And I guess what vertical really comes down to is just targets and knowing your target. But I want to ask, I have a special advisor here. Hey, Google, what is vertical marketing?
According to Wikipedia, a vertical market is a market in which vendors offer goods and services specific to an industry, trade, profession, or other group of customers with specialized needs. An example could be software that manages services in hotels, amenity solutions.
Okay, Google, thanks. All right.
No problem.
That's awful.
Now, so Google,
hey, Google, stop.
Thanks.
Wants to be on the show every time. All righty. So let's, before we get to the gin, let's try to lay out the steps for a successful vertical program. If we were to sort of break it down from the beginning, we're starting fresh. What's step number one?
I think it starts with data analytics. Analyze your customer base and look for really recurring patterns around what they're using, and then really going through and looking at how they describe themselves through the common terminology. And you almost create a dictionary of the words they use to describe this, like either a secret society of like-minded people. And so, yes, we kind of do that. And then we kind of go through the interview process and summarize it in the 10-point plan I discussed. And then I think the other critical thing is that we've all been there where you see this, 60-page document describing how to go to a market. It's got to be on a page. And one of the things we discussed about 10-point plans is 10 slides. If it's 60, it's wrong. And you should be able to, when you ask somebody to describe this market, they should be able to articulate it in 2 minutes. And it's
2 minutes or less. Wow.
And you get it, and then you industrialize it, you package it up with external material. You go through a demand gen, you look at the kind of the associations and events and analysts, but you've got to be able to articulate it too. That's the kind of the test. People really understand. And the one thing I've learned in the last 3 years that was different before, but we always learned that you have three buyers: the technical, the economic, and the end user buyer. And you almost have three personas. If you really understand the market, there's really a true shift. There's one thing that's common to all three. So we don't do three personas anymore. We do this one common agreed pain, and then when the three key people agree on that, then you can go through a market very, very quickly.
That's such an interesting thing, and because I'm on a rant about personas and have been for over a year because I just keep seeing them splinter messaging, and then you hear about the buying committee coming together, and they are looking at 8 different places at the same brand with 8 different perspectives, and the result is they can't come to a commonality. So, Lynne, Mika, I was curious where the data comes from, but what's your experience with the things that Ian lined? What else can we, when we're just starting from scratch, what do you look at?
I think I agree with Ian. Looking at the data is like the most important thing around where have you had success in that market? And I think that's where I always look to say, why did they buy a product? What solution are we providing to them that solve their problem? So I agree with all of what Ian said in terms of the process. The only thing I would add is there has to be, and it doesn't have to be huge, but I don't ever want to do vertical marketing without a sales component. So if we've got vertical marketing going, I need a sales playbook, even if it's short and sweet, but I need to have the salespeople aligned with that same message. And so it's got to be a combination, I think, of marketing material and marketing tactics as well as sales.
Mika, go for it.
I was going to say, I agree with Ian and with what Lynne had said. Lynne, your most recent comment in terms of having one go-to-market versus having this is what sales does and then this is what marketing does, I think definitely is a lot more efficient and better for the customer, frankly. Ian, completely agree in terms of having the reason why, this vertical should consider what you have to offer, and have that be one common element for the company overall, and then possibly have a variation for each of the personas. The other thing I'd add is a perspective on why you may lose. So why you've won deals, but also why you've lost deals within verticals, and why we win. Because there's not every single vertical customer is actually the right customer for what you have to offer. So sometimes you lose deals, and that's not such a bad thing because that customer may churn ultimately anyway because they're not a great fit. But sometimes you lose them because your competitive positioning wasn't as strong, and understanding the difference, I think, is key. So the other one I'd add is, why you lose and why you win, and making sure that you're solid in terms of your messaging on the compete message. So who's gonna compete with you, and then what how can you strengthen your messaging just to make sure that you can objection handle those competitive pressures?
I love that comment, and so often we just focus on the win, but really understanding why you lost is such a great thing. I also want to do a shout out to Julie Kaplan, who left a comment on LinkedIn about information sharing between sales and marketing being key. Thanks for that comment, Julie. All right, this is the time where we take a quick break to go get our gin and bring it back to the table. So let's cue the video and get ready for the Solvay gin. I love that scene. Okay, that's vertical marketing done really well. All right, so let's talk about gin. Today's gin is, first of all, look at this beautiful bottle, is Far North Solvay Gin. It is a craft distillery in Halleck, Minnesota, quite near the Minnesota-Canadian border. The population of Halleck is 980, and some of those folks are making gin. Solveig, by the way, is a Scandinavian woman's name and has deep Nordic roots. Sol is sun, ve is as in strength. I'm thinking sort of American Viking. Okay, team, are you ready? Do you have your, are you ready for a tasting? Here's the challenge for you, which is how many, what do you taste? Let's see if we can name a botanical or two. There are 8. Of course, the dominant is juniper. That's by definition what a gin has to do. So here we go. Ooh. Now, this is a gin you can drink straight. I will say it's got some interesting flavors in there. What do you taste? Anything?
I taste jasmine. Like there's a jasmine taste that I taste. I don't know if that's accurate, but
not on the list. But when these things combine, you never know. What do you have, Lynne?
Just trying another one. I don't know, but I agree with you that it can be. I agree that you could drink it solo. You could drink it alone. I like it. Yeah.
And by the way, this is so much more fun now that dry January is over. Because in the January episodes, I was taking like just a sip and then I put it down. What about you, Ian? What are you getting from this?
It's funny, the power of water suggestion. Like when you said jasmine, I thought, oh yeah, I can smell jasmine as well.
So that's funny. So there are a bunch of botanicals. I'll let you off the hook. I'm terrible at identifying them, but grapefruit is one, fresh thyme, coriander seed, which is you may get that anisey sort of feel to it, cucumber, angelica root, orris root, and something called gentian root. And I have no idea what that is. So this is the moment where we say, hey, Charlotte, our new intern from Duke, what the heck is gentian root?
Hi, everyone. So gentian root is a bitter herb, and it's been used for centuries throughout Europe and China for medicinal purposes. It's still used today in medicine, but it's also in dyes, cosmetics, and even as an ingredient. For example, it can be used as a digestive aid, so a lot of purposes.
Perfect. See, we're using this as a digestive aid. You didn't even know that. Now, one of the other interesting things, and then we're going to move on. This is the first time I've ever seen a gin, and I actually did a lot of homework to try to find it, where they mention what the base alcohol is made of. And this is made from AC Hazlet Winter Rye, which is, because gin can be made from any alcohol that can be fermented, that could be sugar or barley, but they mentioned the rye. So there it is. All right. Thank you, the folks from Far North Spirits. I don't know. What do you think, team? This is, I think it's pretty awesome.
Awesome.
Thumbs
really
up.
Good.
Yes.
Thumbs up. So, all right. So that's Solveig. We do not pronounce the G. Okay. So when vertical marketing, and you started this conversation, Mika, you said it's important to know when you don't win. But so when vertical marketing doesn't work, what is usually the reason?
I mean, I think you just didn't hit the mark in terms of meeting a business need or striking a chord to try to meet a business need. And so it's either, improving top line, improving bottom line. I know that, Ian, you're saying you're in nonprofit. So it's making sure that you're, that the nonprofits that you're servicing can actually service their constituents better. And so I would say usually when we look back, it's that we just didn't hit the mark in terms of being able to communicate our value better than either doing nothing or better than a competitor. And so it's really honing in on our message on how we do deliver that value.
I'll add to that as well. I think some of the times when I feel like I have not been successful in the past around some verticals is not sticking with it long enough. So in typical, fashion of, we put together this integrated program, we ran it for 3 months, we didn't get much from it, and then we ditch it. So I think like anything else, I think you need to stick with it for a while to see what works.
That's such a good point, and one that you could forget is that this is a snowball effect. And when you get in a vertical market and you get one and you get two, and then they start talking to each other,
Yeah.
you know, the goal is not to just get two and move on. The goal is to get a sizable share, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of these markets.
Sorry. I think the original goal, which seems a bit strange, is to interview enough people in enough depth that you really understand the market better than the people you're interviewing. That sounds strange, but if you think about in our market, we sell to financial services and software and NFP. A CFO probably confides in 2 or 3 people about the market. If you interview 50, and you do it really well, you truly have a better understanding of the market than any individual you've spoken to. And that makes them really interested in talking to you because you have that kind of view. So I think that's the first thing is when I've seen things not go well, people haven't done it. They try to jump to conclusions too soon after interviewing 3 people. And the second thing, even if you've done a phenomenal job and you've interviewed 50 people, you think about what the message going out, it's got to be consistent from beginning to end. You don't want to have your marketing saying one thing, salespeople saying another thing, website saying another thing, and that happens a lot.
Interesting. I'm wondering as we're having this conversation, you know, obviously the pandemic changed a lot of things, and one of the ways that used to be a great way to engage vertical markets was to go to the trade shows. And one of the definitions of a vertical market is that they have trade shows and they have trade associations and all these things. How did you make up for that in 2020 and in this year moving forward? Because, right, I mean, weren't trade shows a big part of this?
They were. What we've done is bring a virtual forum of like-minded individuals of a similar vertical together to have a conversation, and less a conversation about what we offer, but more of a conversation about what they're seeing in their markets based on what's happening in the world today. Not dissimilar to the CMO forums that you have, Drew. Is in terms of the huddles, is having we look at chief security officers within companies, for example, and we bring together chief security officers of financial institutions who face very different challenges now versus before. State and local governments face new challenges now because for the most part they have to be able to service their constituents remotely, and people are trying to figure it out as we go along. So bringing them together to help, create a huddle of like-minded people has really been beneficial because it's not just selling them; it's actually helping them help each other with the challenges they face today. And it ends up being a great focus group to hear what they're facing, and that has actually provided us a ton of traction.
I think it was you who said the more you help these folks, the more you ended up selling. I'm pretty sure that came out of early on during the pandemic. I seem to recall that. And it's interesting. What you're essentially saying is, because we can't go where they are, we need to bring them together, and we have to do it in a way that is actually helpful and of value to them. So you're suddenly in the business of we won't call them trade shows because it's not. It's a different kind of experience. But you're the aggregator. You're the one who's bringing them together. And Lynne, have you had a similar approach to make up for the lack of trade shows and the leads that used to come from those for verticals?
I have, yes. We're doing a lot of virtual events, similar kind of things, smaller events. We either group them together by, it could be job functions. So, chief digital officers, for instance. Sometimes it's different companies from a vertical. So retail, for instance, we've done those. Or we also do it by geography, which I find is very helpful. So we have a virtual event, for instance, in the Bay Area, where you're inviting people from the Bay Area, and they may actually already know each other. Or at least they know the environment, they know the companies. And I find that if they have some familiarity with each other, then clearly they talk more. But we don't sell on them. I don't do a sales pitch about who we are or what we offer. It is really to bring them together and maybe talk about what's happening in their industry or in their area.
Yeah, Ian, anything different in that world for you as you spin this?
A couple of things that we did, like Lynne was saying, the social aspect, because people just, with kind of the people bring people together. The other thing we did was we used to go to a show called SaaStra, for example, for the SaaS software market. And that got cancelled. So we ran our own virtual event, which was like a big full-scale event. And that was really successful as well. So I think it's two things: doing the big events and doing the pure social events as well is really important.
So I've been hearing a lot among CMOs and just people of Zoom fatigue and video fatigue and just this, and I'm wondering if as we move in, to February now of 2021, do we have to just keep raising the bar in terms of the quality of these events, in terms of the food that you're providing for the food tasting or the celebrity guests that you're bringing? I mean, is it harder to get people to attend these events?
I think we're still seeing a lot of engagement. It's just, I think the ones that see the best success are the ones that where there is engagement, versus selling at or talking at individuals. It's where people feel like they're learning from each other and they're able to take away something that will help them run their business better from a set of peers versus a vendor feeling like a vendor is talking at them. So that's something that I think has been key in our events. I mean, I think it certainly is fun to have an introduction of have a cooking class or a spirits, a spirit tasting, or having a happy hour or a lunch. I just right before this I came from a women's lunch where we all we sent everybody an Uber Eats coupon, and they could order whatever they wanted, and part of the dialogue was sharing what you ordered. But and then talking about some core issues, that folks are facing right now. So I think having a dialogue and helping us all deal with, the environment that we're in today has definitely been a good grounding force. And in some cases that is related to our technology. In some cases, it's how do you deal with the mental health issues that you're finding in your staff and in your community. And that ties us all together and actually helps us, be better professionals when we go back.
Interesting. Gabby Zeiderfeld asking about these virtual events. Thanks for your question, Gabby. The question is, do you invite your sales teams to these client virtual events? And I don't even know if we call them client virtual events. I would call them customer/prospect events. And do you?
We do them with them. So it's not a marketing event. It's actually not a sales event. I think we see them as just a customer event where we divide and conquer, and we host them with our sellers. So I don't think it's seen as necessarily as something that marketing does. I think it's seen as something that we do together.
Now, go ahead, Lynn.
We do a similar. So we do invite some of the sales folks. I make sure that we have the right quantity of people so we don't outnumber anyone. But I do a prep session ahead of time. I'm very careful about this. I do a prep session. This is what we're going to talk about. I'm going to ask you these following questions. Can you please chime in here to talk about what you're seeing in the market and things like that? So it is pretty structured. I'm careful of that to make sure that we set the expectations with sales that it can't be too salesy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so thanks for that question, Gabby. And it's because of where we are in the show right now, it's time to ask, what would Ben Franklin say when thinking about vertical marketing? And he actually has a perfect quote for this, and it is, "Don't think to hunt two hares with one dog." All right, you got that? It's not too complicated. If you're trying to reach two vertical markets, don't try the same program. So thank you, Ben. You're dead on there. So speaking of two hares, one dog, how should we be thinking about measuring the success of a vertical program? Because I know we could just talk about revenue gain, but do we think about we have to get a certain sort of penetration in a particular vertical before? When you look at the metrics for that, do you think about vertical a little bit differently?
So for us, Moore always talked about bowling alleys. Now, and if you think about each market is a pin. The head bowling pin is the first market you penetrate, and one of the critical things is not just penetrating it, but what does it lead on to? So does it make it easy to knock down the second and the third pin, then the fourth, fifth, and sixth pin? Because actually going through an alley is way easier than creating a new alley. So I think when you think about a market and success, it's one of the phrases is be a small fish in a big pond, but then knock down it's got to lead to other places to go to as well.
So interesting. So you see it as we're doing well, and we can just sort of extend that. I'm curious, Mika and Lynne, when you look at going into a vertical market, do you think about the metrics? And Lynne, you already mentioned the notion of leaving a market too early. So obviously that speaks to penetration. But from a metric standpoint, do we always circle back to, well, did it, we got this amount of revenue deliver or pipeline, and that's what we're responsible for?
Well, I think for us, sometimes it's, we're always coming out with new products too. And sometimes it's about just getting some early adopters. So it doesn't necessarily mean, oh, I have to get whatever, pick your favorite number, 50 customers. Sometimes you're after just a couple of customers to help be your early adopters, and then to leverage those. So sometimes that could be success. Your
beachhead. Mika, What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to what Lynne had just said, I mean, to get to 1,000, you have to get to your first 10. And so it's really thinking about which marquee 10 would we get that would actually enable the next turn of the flywheel to get the next, 50 with the same effort. And so it's really looking at, if we could take our pick and we could cherry pick our favorite customers that we would say were on our list in X amount of time, what would they be? And really being focused on making sure that we're spending our effort on those customers. And then obviously looking more broadly at what are the new contacts that we're building and new conversations we're enabling within that vertical, and specific personas within that vertical. So it's, the end in mind in terms of who are our first 10, and if we could pick the first 10, what would they be? And let's go after them. And then let's make sure, more broadly, we're looking at the key personas and looking at how many conversations we're enabling with those key personas to keep to enable the next 50.
And so when we're picking our 10, because I love that, it's similar to the bowling pin analogy, which I'm somewhat obsessed with as a bowler. But when we're picking the 10, are we picking them based on their sort of marquee value? Because sometimes a big brand is less likely to be a good testimonial, for example, whereas sometimes a fast-growing but smaller brand might more than welcome to be the one that will talk to your future customers. How do you define and pick that first 10?
I think we do by fit. So, I think that early on, Ian had talked about looking at, a set of criteria and outlining the core customers that you're going after from Jeffrey Moore's outline of how do you really identify your market and describe your market. And so it's product, and Lynne, I think, went into product market fit. I think it's, really looking at product market fit, as well as, frankly, we do look for the brand, and it might be, an up and coming brand in a specific vertical. Or it might be an established brand, but that branding opportunity that then is a great reference is something that we do look at, but it doesn't always have to be the biggest customer. It could be the most interesting customer that still might be relatively small.
Interesting.
Product market fit is the biggest
one. So Lynne, when you're looking at this, and again, we have to give it enough time, right? We're identifying the 10 that Mika suggested. We got to give time. And part of the way that I've seen this happen is you sometimes kind of give the product away or some sweetheart deals to get in the market. Is that, am I making that up, or are we sometimes, in order to get a foothold in a market, sometimes we just bend our pricing rules a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that it depends what the customer is most interested in. Maybe what they want is exposure. And so maybe maybe they want exposure, maybe they want to reduce price. Typically, they probably want more services than anything else, is my experience. So it's not just, lower the price tag. It's, what are you going to do to help us be successful with your product? Are you going to stick with us? Are you going to offer support? Are you going to give us training? Those types of things, I think, are even more important and more valuable to customers, than just like a drop in price. They want to be successful. Everyone wants to be successful. Usually their own personal reputations are on the line. So, they want to be as successful as possible. My experience is surround them with services that can help make them successful and be those, what we call, digital heroes.
We do more proof of concept. So we put something in line, and part of our business is selling, security products and anti-fraud products. So we'll say, okay, Bank X we'll put our product actually, behind the product you're currently using and show you how much fraudulent traffic is actually making it into your environment. We've done the similar thing with one of the top 3 social media companies on the planet during the election, to actually show them that actually a vast majority, 90% plus of their traffic was actually bot traffic that's trying to skew public perception, and so so we're saying, okay, we'll put a proof of concept in there for you. We'll show you what's happening, and we're happy to take it out. And so most banks are not willing to take it out once they realize how much fraudulent traffic is actually coming in and skimming balances off of other people. Or for retailers, a big cybercrime is actually going and taking credit gift card balances and skimming off gift card balances from customers, and that's tens of millions of dollars for a lot of companies. So we put in proofs of concept to show the value we offer, and then we're happy to take it out if they don't love it. But it's hard to take it out once you realize the benefit.
Interesting. Go ahead, Ian.
One thing that Lynne said, I'd like to comment, a little nuance on it, is that around the time element. So if you already research a market, I think one of the critical questions is that market really heavily defended by a good competitor? And if it is, you should walk from it. But if it's defended by a legacy product, you should go after it. And then the time element, you need to always dominate a market in a year. You become very, very strong very quickly. So for me, is that if you it's just before you actually enter the market, just add some diligence around, is there a very good competitor there or not? If it's not, time is not very rarely an issue.
Interesting. Okay, so as we've talked about several things in this path to being successful in vertical, that obviously you got to know the target, because that's by definition, a vertical is a target audience. It is a well-defined with common things, and if you really get in there, you know it inside and out. As Ian would say, more about their category than they do. Okay, then you've got to make sure that you're aligned with your sales team and that you're going at it. Then you got to get a beachhead and prove that you can be successful in this thing, and you got to stick with it. Part of the digital analysis up front that Ian talked about, which I think is really interesting, is there a competitor that you can just that's been there a long time that you can just beat the crap out of? If we had said 3 years ago, GoToMeeting was such a dominant player in the category that Zoom could come along and just rip them out, you would all laugh. There's no way GoToMeeting is dominant. Why would you waste your time? So yeah, there's opportunities, not that they were necessarily vertical. So my question in all of this is, let's look ahead. Where's this going? Are we going to be spending more dollars on vertical? Is it going to get harder? Is it going to get easier?
I think it's a great question.
Come on, get your, what's going to change here as we're in 2021? What's going to be the sort of, if you were ahead of the curve with vertical, what would you be doing next?
I'll jump in. I think we're going to see more. I think we should see more, and all of us should be thinking more about vertical, because, our expectations as consumers are rising, right? Like we all want, we all want to be known more. We want every experience that we have, almost every experience that we have with a brand to be valuable and to know something about us. And look at how aggravated we get when you're talking and communicating with a brand and they don't know anything about you. We all get aggravated, whether it's the cable company or whatever company it is. So I think the more we know about them as individuals and as their jobs and as the industries, the more we're going to be able to communicate with them and relate to them. And that, I think, just equates to better marketing. So in terms of the, dialing up or dialing down, I'd say it's the year probably to figure out how to dial up.
Interesting. So we'd be dialing up. So I think the core things for us is you have a horizontal market and you bubble out new verticals out of that. And that's how you grow in the next year. The other thing is you kind of go deeper into the micro verticals as well. So from faith-based to Catholic diocese, for example, then you invest in it. And it's already that you go deeper and you bubble out the two kind of core things for us. And the reason you do that is that just from a marketing, every dollar you spend, it's just way, way more efficient.
Right. And I would think, that's part of the reason why we're having this conversation is if we're doing vertical marketing right, and we're marketing the tough book to a police force, we know there's a real good chance that there's an alignment because there's a need and there's a target, and we should be able to figure out how to communicate to them effectively, which is what we marketers do. I would think some of this also may be enabled by AI, because we've been talking a lot about how we know customers. Feels like there's a lot of data out there that we could probably be processing, and whether that applies to the message that we share with the vertical or whether it applies to how the BDRs are communicating and following up, I would think that there would be some tech that's going to play that's really going to be able to accelerate the impact of vertical. What do you think?
Absolutely. So I did it when I'd approach a market myself. I looked at, say, financial services. We'd look at family offices. I literally went to every single website in our database for that whole segment, looked at all the different words they used to describe themselves. It's just a massive amount of work. And with AI, you can look for, find me similar ones to these. And it's just, doesn't do 100% of what you do, but it dramatically changes how quickly you understand that the segment to research. It's just night and day.
Wow. So the speed of research is going to change. Anything else as we approach the close? Any other forward-thinking thoughts, Mika, Lynne?
Well, along the lines of AI, what we've done is we've taken our data and then married that with third-party data to drive predictive modeling against of a customer segment, which ones are actually have a greatest propensity to buy. So when we talk about the first 10 and then the next 50, we stack rank all of our customers based on predictive modeling to see which ones are most likely to buy, which helps us focus, and therefore we increase our conversion rates, we increase our deal sizes, and we're far more efficient just because we're focusing on customers that are most likely to buy. So that in that case, AI has helped us a ton.
Amazing. Lynne, last word.
I agree on the AI front for sure. This is definitely the year for that.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you, Lynne, Mika, Ian. You're all great sports. Thank you, Foreign North Spirits, and for this fantastic Solvay gin. And thank you for the audience for sticking with us. Please join us in 2 weeks when we talk about employee training and mentorship with Tanika Vital Pringle, Caroline Tien Spalding, and Jeff Perkins. And you can cue the music, Melissa. Produced by Melissa Caffrey. Our intern is Charlotte McAvoy. For show notes and past episodes, please visit renegade.com, home of quite possibly the savviest B2B marketing agency in New York City. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, and until next time, keep those Renegade thinking caps on and strong.